Hello, welcome to episode 2 of A Week in Watches. I am your host, Zach Weiss, co-founder of Worn & Wound. Thank you for joining me. First, I just want to say that, last week ended up being a big success, and that was largely thanks to you. You guys came out in numbers and supported the show, and that was really exciting for us. And you left tons of really excellent comments, which we're going to take to heart. We asked for your feedback, and you gave it, and that was awesome. So first off, the music. It's going to cut away. Don't worry. That was my fault. I thought it'd be too quiet in here, but, everyone has spoken and we appreciate that. Secondly, the clock behind me, I set it. That thing has a tendency of getting unplugged. I can't promise it'll be set, but at least for this show, there it is. So we have a lot to cover today. We got Micro-Rotors, we got Moser, we got a really cool new watch by Furlan Marri, which you perhaps have seen. But before we get to that, a quick word from our sponsor, which is once again the Wind Up Watch Shop, where we recently added Bulova. I have here on the A15 Pilot watch, which has 2 internal bezels. It's a really cool piece. If you want to check that out and more, head to windupwatchshop.com. All right, let's get into it. So Yema announced a new in-house caliber featuring a Micro-Rotor automatic winding system. I think this is really, really exciting news. Yema, like I just said, they announced this new Micro-Rotor movement. They've had in-house movements before, but they've been, kind of standard 3-hand movements, sort of not 2824 clones, but, something that they could kind of use in the, instead of a 2824. And they're going to be largely manufacturing this new caliber in their Morteau, France workshops, which is very exciting for them. They weren't quite 100% clear on what exactly they are manufacturing there. It definitely seems like they're making their bridges, a lot of the construction. I don't know if they're doing gears and jewels and things like that, but they were also specific to say that their escapement is still outsourced and is still a Swiss escapement. But anyway, Micro-Rotors themselves are really cool, and this is what I think is really exciting about this. So Micro-Rotor movements tend to be thinner movements because they don't have a large mass over the back of the movement. Instead, like the name describes, it's a small rotor off center typically. This allows, yes, for thinner movement. And if you look at like the history of watches, particularly vintage watches like the Universal Genève pole routers, caliber 69, this was in watches back in the 50s and 60s that were incredibly thin, incredibly petite, but fully automatic. I've owned a Universal Genève pole router, and it's an absolute delight to wear. So getting back to that sort of construction is really exciting. And currently, Micro-Rotors are really only available in fairly expensive higher end watches, probably starting in the 5 to 7K range with something like an Hermes. So it's a really big development for a brand. Obviously, any sort of in-house movement is a big development for a brand, and I think moving this more in-house in France is also just a big deal for them. That's always just a big kind of part of the progress for a brand. And I'm just excited that they're doing something that isn't just another clone of like an ETA 2824. The other exciting part of this is just, what Yema does in general. So Yema watches are, you're probably familiar with something like the Superman. These are watches that are fairly affordable. They don't really go much higher than like 2, maybe 3K, and that would be for a mechanical chronograph. So while we haven't seen what watches these movements are going to be put in, I somehow doubt that they're going to be something like jumping up in price point too much for these. I mean, the nature of it being an in-house movement in France might suggest it be a little bit more, but once again, that is purely conjecture. It could be the exact same price. These could be $1,000 Micro-Rotor watches coming out in the near future. Can't say for sure, but I'm certainly very excited about that opportunity, or potential, I should say. The new movement is called the CMM.20. And yeah, we just are really looking forward to see how they use it, hopefully this year, but not 100% sure. They haven't said, they've been careful not to say exactly when this is going to be put into a new watch. Next up, we have a curious collaboration. Moser teams up with streetwear brand Undefeated to create a limited edition collaboration. So Moser Watches is the brand, the Swiss brand that you might be familiar, made the Mad Watch, which was a hilarious timepiece that was actually made out of hardened Swiss cheese. And side note here, I'm really excited that I've organically been able to mention cheese in 2 episodes of Week in Watches so far. I can't promise if I'll be able to keep that up, but it was, I didn't have to force it this time. But that's kind of, downplaying what the brand does. Anyway, they make incredible watches with really beautiful movements, and they've done a lot of really interesting high complications, and they also are very open to collaborations I think in a way that other brands perhaps on their level have been kind of more slow to kind of get into. So, they've done collaborations with MBNF. They've done collaborations with the Armory, which is a menswear store that is in in New York and overseas. So they've done some really cool stuff. And this one is perhaps the most kind of outside the norm in that they've teamed up with Undefeated, which is a streetwear company. So Undefeated was founded in 2002. They sell like high-end collectible sneakers. They sell things under their own brand. It's like a very coveted brand name. They have boutiques around the world. From what I can tell, they're sort of like Supreme, if Supreme was as cool as Supreme used to be. But I don't want to get in trouble saying anything like that either. But they're also kind of like Kith and these other brands, and it's definitely an interesting crossover. So the resulting watch is really it's quite attractive. It's based on the Moser Streamliner chronograph, and it just got this kind of aggressive treatment to it. So the dial has a black tiger camo fume, which, just saying that, I mean, that's a pretty exciting concept. And it's this heavily textured dial with this really unique organic pattern on it, which is a motif that apparently Undefeated uses in other collaborations, other limited editions they make. The case then has been darkened using an anthracite DLC. So the whole thing is just dark and smoky and aggressive. And so this is one of the Streamliner chronographs, which features the HMC 902 caliber, which was co-developed with Agenor. And this is a really incredibly cool movement. It seems to be very similar to Agenor's Agengraph, which we talked about, or I talked about when I reviewed the Singer Reimagined Track 1 chronograph. I actually did an article called Why I Love It, and we did a video about that. I get into a lot more detail about the movement there, so I do suggest you hit a link that we'll put somewhere and check that out. But it's a very high-end chronograph movement with a very unique construction, and in the instance of this watch, it has a central minute counting chronograph, which is something I personally just really love. The Moser X Undefeated will be limited to 76 units and will be priced at $55,000 each. Obviously this is a very high priced luxury watch, but I think they're going to sell it really quickly because it's a very unique crossover that is already getting a ton of press because, not many people have engaged streetwear brands in this way. And obviously streetwear brands, particularly one with the kind of, equity that Undefeated has, will reach a really large audience. So this is a really cool collaboration, and, just kudos to Moser for kind of going outside the box and teaming up with a really interesting brand. Tag Heuer announced this week that they are updating their smartwatch platform to display NFTs. So I am not an NFT guy. I am not a crypto guy. So this concept might be a little lost on me. Hey, maybe I shouldn't even talk about it, but it is interesting and certainly surprising, and the kind of thing that I think this format is perfect for. So the Tag Heuer smartwatch has gotten an operating system upgrade so that you can display your NFTs, your non-fungible tokens, via connecting it to your digital wallet thing. So I guess this means, as far as I'm concerned, I know NFTs are worth a lot of money and there's this whole thing, but the actual art that is associated with these NFTs, particularly these kind of things like those like sad apes or whatever they're called, little icon avatar things you could display on Twitter and such, can now be displayed right there on the dial of your watch. So, clearly this is a play by Tag Heuer to attract a new community, a very quickly growing community, granted one that, is tied to, financial markets and everything. So it's a very complicated concept as well. Perhaps if you are an NFT owner, this makes total sense to you because you want to flaunt them. I think others might not want to show them at all. I really don't quite get the culture itself, but the timing seems a little weird. From what I could tell, the crypto market and NFT market is kind of going down right now. But once again, this is not my specialty. And I mean, maybe it's the perfect time because if the NFT isn't worth a lot of money, at least you can show it on the dial of your watch. So in order to do this, obviously you need the Tag Heuer smartwatch. And that seems like a very specific person who has the NFT investor is a Tag Heuer smartwatch consumer as well. But if that happens to be you, if you are an NFT investor, if you have a Tag Heuer smartwatch, I'm really curious about your interest in watches, and especially if you're watching this video. So let us know what you think about this below, because yeah, that's just a crazy kind of intersection of things. But I don't know. Kudos to Tag Heuer for kind of embracing this culture. Once again, it's a little bit lost on me, but I'm just not the consumer for this. Welsbro Watches is back and has the best names. Okay, this one is going to be quick. Welsbro has launched a collection of 3 new watches under the moniker the Staten Island collection. They're all bright, fun, colorful, designed for summer, and really exciting. And like I said, they have the best names. So they're inspired by the New York City borough that, you know, for those of us who live here and aren't in Staten Island might just think is very far away, but also brought to us, you know, the likes of Wu-Tang Clan. So Staten Island, you know, gets to stay. The first watch in this collection is bright blue and white, and it's called Italian Ices. And, you know, you look at these watches and they're actually all quite delicious. I think they even put on the back, do not eat. It's a funny joke, but the watches like look like kind of like ice cream. But the Italian Ices on the nose looks great. Next up, there is the Mutz. The Mutz, which is a green and white. And apparently Mutz is like mozzarella. I always thought that was Motz, but apparently in Staten Island it's Mutz. Go figure, I'm not from Staten Island. But then there is my personal favorite, which is the Gabagool. Which the fact that I got to say Gabagool in this program and didn't have to force it is fantastic. This one is like bubblegum pink and bright red, which I guess sort of looks like meats. That's a kind of a weird thing to associate with it. It's a very actually pretty watch in pink. It's very exciting and colorful and fun. But yeah, so the name Gabagool is derived from, it's like a colloquial way of saying capicola. And you might be familiar with it from Tony Soprano having said that many times throughout the Soprano series. It's really a joy to say. So I recommend you say it out loud right now. Gabagool. All right. Anyway, the watches are all powered by vintage French Ebauche 4612 calibers, which was from around 1975. These aren't movements you hear very often, but they were used back when by Heuer and other brands. You know, obviously they're going to be, you know, servicing them and everything, so they're in good condition. It definitely adds like a unique aspect to the watch. There's only 30 pieces of each colorway, and they cost $880 each, which I don't know, seems actually like a really reasonable price, all things considered. And for the opportunity to say Gabagool as often as possible, having a watch on your wrist where you can literally tell everybody this is the Gabagool. You know, that is the opportunity of a lifetime. So I wouldn't let that pass you by. All right, now we have the release of the week, which once again, I don't know if this is gonna happen every week, but like last week, there was a pretty significant watch drop this week, and it was by Furlan Marri. So they've launched a follow-up to last year's Mecha Quartz powered Tasty Tundi inspired chronograph, which was a watch that really kind of took enthusiasts and watch world sort of by storm in a way that I really could have never predicted. We had the watches here when they first came out. They were very beautiful watches. Really, you know, what really made them interesting was the level of detailing and finishing that went into a watch that I believe the full retailers on Kickstarter when they first launched was like $475. So a very affordable watch, obviously powered by the Seiko Mecha Quartz movement. You know, it seemed like what it was. It was a nice kind of like a fun version of a, you know, historical like luxury watch. They weren't really hiding the fact that it was inspired by these sort of Patek references, etc. So it wasn't surprised that it did well. But what followed was quite surprising. So not only did they do well, but there was a crazy aftermarket surge in prices. So you saw on the likes of like Chrono 24, these watches were going for thousands of dollars. These watches that originally cost a few $100s. So there was this ravenous aftermarket appetite for them. It felt a little hypey, but at the same time, like very cool for a brand, a new brand, especially a brand that was essentially making something that was a nod back to something else, and a you know, a Seiko powered chronograph. It's really, I would never have predicted that would have happened like 8 years ago. So it was really cool, but then it gets even better when Furlan Marri won a GPHG award. You know, granted is something you enter yourself into and whatever, but it's a stuffy institution, from my estimate, that no offense to the GPHG, that, you know, typically awards what you expect to see, you know, high-end luxury brands, etc. Once again, a Mecha Quartz powered chronograph that is essentially, you know, not necessarily fully an homage watch, but is certainly an homage in a literal sense to certain chronographs and an era of watchmaking. It was absolutely shocking, but like seriously good on Furlan Marri for breaking ground there. You know, that's really a big deal. So they had a good first album. How do you successfully follow that up? I don't know if I'd want to be in their shoes, but they've definitely done something interesting. So they've come out with a mechanical watch, and it's called the 2116-A. And whether or not it's a worthy successor, I think, time will tell, but I also be really curious to hear from everyone what you all think about it. So this one is a Swiss-made mechanical three-hander. So they've stepped away from quartz. They've gone into Swiss movements, and, you know, obviously they've kind of stepped up the pricing accordingly, but I'll get that in a minute. The 2116-A is another, it's aesthetic dip into the past. So as my colleague, Blake Bettner, managing editor of Worn & Wound, discussed in his introductory article, his hands-on piece and his video, once again, there'll be a link to that around the 2116-A blends certain Patek and Vacheron references into one kind of compact package. So it's sort of like a meld of different nods to historical pieces. It has a black sector dial with applied Breguet numerals in polished steel. These kind of beautiful polished hands that have this very three-dimensional shape that look like fountain pen quills. It also has a crosshair on the dial, which I personally love. If you look at our limited editions, you'll see a handful of crosshairs pop up every now and then. It's just something I really personally like, especially on like a sector dial. People have pointed out, though, that the line runs through the N. I understand that that's maddening. I feel like that is sort of a call back to how like these things would have been printed in steps back, you know, in the early 20th century. Whether or not that's a good call, once again, leave it up to you, but that, I could see how that could annoy you. The dial, however, is not really the star of the show. It is the case here, which is this 37.5 millimeter case with teardrop lugs, which are sort of like mounted internally to the case. Teardrop lugs obviously give a really kind of Baroque early 20th century look, and they definitely, you know, it's a look, as they'd say. You know, it's very distinct. It's a bit aggressively styled in a sense, and it might be a love it or leave it detail, but it's certainly something you don't see very often on the market these days. Immediately when I saw this watch, I did think of the Ophion Velos, which did something similar but manufactured their case with Carré Vautelan and at a few $1,000s more. But, you know, so they're kind of popping up as people are sort of digging through the history of watches and finding, you know, cool details and whatever to bring back. In addition to the teardrop lugs, the case, and I've seen it in person, is just also very beautifully finished, you know, as per the original Furlan Marri's. Like, they really have stuck to an attention to detail, which I think is going to be the thing that'll set them apart. And that might be hard to see in photos, but certainly in the metal, it is something you can appreciate. I have to say, I get it's cool to name your watch a reference number, but as a reviewer, it gets very tiring saying numbers over and over. But that's an aside. Inside the 2116-A is a new movement by Le Jeu Perret. So Le Jeu Perret is a fairly high-end mechanical, you know, movement manufacturer. You know, their chronographs are in watches that go, you know, up into, you know, 5 figures, way higher, but they have introduced a line of, you know, once again, sort of 28-24 alternatives that you're going to be seeing a lot more of in the near future. They're just kind of rolling out now, but I know of several things that are coming out, and it's very exciting as Le Jeu Perret is a very good brand, and the movement seems like it's a high quality movement. It has 68 hours of power reserve, a frequency of 28,800 beats per hour. So it's a little bit above your average 2024 or Solita type movement. The rotor on this one is also made out of tungsten, which is interesting. And the whole thing is apparently decorated like top level finish. However, there is no open case back, so you're going to take their word for it. Actually, interestingly, the interior of the entire case has been given a perlage treatment. So your watchmaker is going to get a really wonderful show when he has to service the watch. But you might never see this. But that's a sort of a level of attention to detail that I think, you know, people are into, you know, watches us can appreciate. The 2116-A will be priced around $1,250. That's kind of converted from 1,250 Swiss francs, but right now they're about equivalent. That's certainly a step up from their previous model. It's several times more expensive, but I think for what you're looking at, the level of fit, the level of finish, that movement we just mentioned seems completely reasonable. But it is, of course, a jump up. And it's interesting. I wonder if they're going to bounce between those two price points, or maybe even take like a Ming style approach and maybe even go higher. Certainly there is a bold appetite for this brand. So if you're rolling your eyes thinking, oh no, another watch I'm not going to be able to buy, the Furlan Marri is actually rolling this one out in an interesting way. So they're going to be giving a 10-day buying window, which is going to start on June 24th, which is upcoming Friday from when we recorded this. It's June 24th, 2022 for people in the future. And in those 10 days, basically, it's a free-for-all, but everyone who wants to buy one can buy one, and then they're going to manufacture them after. And if you want this version with the black dial, it, however, is going to be limited to just these 10 days. There will be future models, but they have not announced what the sort of permanent collection is going to look like. It's going to have is presumably the same dial design, just colors, etc. So yeah, I mean, what do you think? Please let us know. Is this a worthy follow-up? Is this going to win another GPHG award? You know, I don't know. I think they've made something really quite attractive here. There seems to be a hunger growing for dressier timepieces, and certainly the attention to detail is something that people appreciate. So I think they're going to sell an awful lot of them. And that's it for this week. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And, you know, once again, please leave us comments and suggestions below. We're still developing this, and we would love to hear more from you. We'll be sticking to it, though. And for daily watch content, head to wornandwound.com. See you next time.